that's probably the most important thing I have in my possession. Hey everyone, David Rishpan here again with you on YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is not the video I intended to make this week. We have lost one of my greatest influences and inspirations, the legendary Brazilian instrumentalist and composer Hermeto Pascoal. This isn't going to be an in-depth overview of his work that would take many videos. It was just I had the realization that, at least on this YouTube channel, I haven't really explained the depth of my involvement in Brazilian music, and more to the point, how influential and inspirational Hermeto Pascoal has been in that entire journey. So this is what the video is about. It's about my journey through the work of Hermeto Pascoal. I guess I'll go chronologically. I discovered Brazilian music kind of in earnest and for real in 2005. I've talked a lot about that in other interviews, but the Cliff's Notes of it is that I was at the Banff Centre for the Arts in Alberta, Canada, and I heard an American pianist named Carrie Politzer who had a thing going on in her music that I really enjoyed and appreciated, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And when I talked to Carrie after her set, she told me she was listening to a lot of Brazilian pop music. And from that moment on, I went down the rabbit hole of discovering all kinds of Brazilian pop music from the 60s and 70s. And then in 2006, the year after, I did my one and only cruise ship contract. And I made friends with a Brazilian colleague on the ship, and she passed me a compilation CD, which is very mid-2000s. It was called Chill Brazil 2. And mixed in among all this kind of electro samba that was very trendy at the time, there was a tune called Suite Norte Sul Leste Oeste by Hermeto Pascoal. And that composition bowled me over. I had no idea what was going on. I had heard nothing like it before. Also around this time, there was an article about Hermeto in Keyboard magazine, and if the search engine gods let me find it, I will link it in the description. And that was the first time I read about Hermeto being referred to as a bruxo, which is his most common nickname. Bruxo means sorcerer in Portuguese. And I put that word away, I filed that word away, because I thought it sounded cool, but also because I very much agreed with Hermeto, and that music at its highest caliber is a form of magic, and that when music is at its best, it's bigger than any single human being or single musician. It is a form of sorcery, a form of alchemy, a form of magic. And so I filed that word away. The other nickname, common nickname for Hermeto, is the champion, the campeão. And also in the mid-2000s, I was a big fan of Jason Moran and the Bandwagon, and Jason Moran had come to prominence with a series of pieces based on transcribing speech, including Ringing My Phone. And one of his big lighthouses for creating music by transcribing speech was Hermeto Pascoal, who called it music of the aura. So all these things in the mid-2000s kind of deepened my awareness of Hermeto, and I just kind of dove in and checked out as much of his stuff as I could access. There was a book of lead sheets that was available, edited by Jovino Santos Neto, his longtime copyist and pianist and flautist and translator. In the early 2010s, I had a duo gig with the guitarist Christopher Carniello, and we bonded over our mutual love for Hermeto Pascoal. And in this kind of unassuming bar gig, 5 to 7 cocktail hour piano guitar duo gig, we would sneak in multiple Hermeto tunes. I would bring tunes in, Chris would bring tunes in, and we expanded each other's repertoire of Hermeto tunes to the point where we could do 2 entire sets of Hermeto music, just piano and guitar. By this point as well, I had started my own trio, which I named Trio Brucho, and I named it explicitly in honor of Hermeto and in honor of this idea that music can and should be magical. And then in 2012, my friend David Beckett, who works for the radio station WPFV in Burlington, Vermont, who is also a huge fan of Brazilian music and Hermeto Pascoal in particular, tipped me off that Hermeto was coming to the Flynn Theater in Burlington. Chris and I and our other friend Vincent Stephen Ong, we all got tickets. We drove down. We met up with Dave Beckett. We immensely enjoyed the show. And this is with his last long-standing group, which wound up being called A Nave Mai, the mothership. And that show just blew all of our minds in Burlington. And because Dave Beckett is quite connected to the Burlington Discover Jazz Festival and the Flynn Theater, being a radio journalist and all of this, at the end of the show, he turned to me and said, "Do you want to go backstage? I know the crew at the Flynn. I can ask if we can go backstage." And of course, we all jumped at the chance. And at the time, my Portuguese was not anywhere near as good as it is now, but it was functional and kind of rudimentary. And so I explained to Hermeto that we were all big fans of his work and that Chris and I were actually performing a lot of his work in Montreal on our gigs, and that he was a huge source of inspiration to us. If you know anything about Hermeto Pascoal, you know he was very prolific. He wrote, he had a whole project called The Calendar of Sound, o Calendário do Som, for which he composed a song a day for a year, and it was a leap year, so everybody in the world would have a song for their birthday. And at the Burlington show, he performed a song that he had written that day. He wrote it in the hotel room, and they performed it that night at the gig. And after, or in the middle of our discussion, Hermeto turned around, went back down the stairs backstage of the Flynn, and gave me the manuscript of the tune he wrote in Burlington, Vermont that day. That's probably the most important thing I have in my possession. After that, obviously having that kind of gift from Hermeto just deepened my appreciation of his music and of him as a human being. And I just kind of kept going down the incredible rabbit hole that is his repertoire. And I got this idea of wanting to really understand what went into his music. And then not trying to copy his music, but trying to understand what the influences of his music were. and then how could I combine it in my own way? And that thought experiment became Trio Bruxo's 2019 album, The Sorcerer's Flag, A Bandeira do Bruxo, which explicitly is my tribute to Hermeto. And in a lesser form, Egberto Gismonti, but definitely my tribute to Hermeto. And a big part of understanding his work, there's some fantastic masterclasses online with Jovino Santos Neto that I watched that were really edifying. But then there is a doctoral thesis by, I want to get his name right, Luiz Costa-Lima Neto, that has been translated into English, but I think when I was doing my research was still only available in Portuguese. And I'll put the title here. It's a really brilliant analysis of Hermeto's compositional style, and the thing that unlocked everything for me was, there's a quote from Hermeto about how everyone assumed he was super into Stravinsky and modernist composition because his harmony is so dense. And he said it doesn't, Stravinsky's cool and everything, but it doesn't come from that. It came from him growing up in Alagoas, on a farm, if I remember correctly, where there was all kinds of scrap metal. And he would just run around and bang on the scrap metal and then try and recreate the sounds of the scrap metal, but the only instrument he had available to him was a diatonic button accordion. And a diatonic accordion is made up of triads, so the kind of harmony that he pioneered, or the kind of harmony that he used that has all these superimposed triads, it comes from trying to recreate the sound of scrap metal on a non-chromatic instrument. And what, Western ears thought sounded like Stravinsky was really coming from this very childlike place. This very pure place of, I want to recreate the sound of running around and banging on sheet metal or scrap metal or whatever, and Hermeto's guiding philosophy was tudo é som, everything is sound. In the lockdowns, I had the great privilege of taking virtual lessons with Hermeto saxophonist JP and with his pianist André Marques. On my last trip to Sao Paulo, I got to meet JP in person, and my heart goes out to the mothership, to the Navi Mai, to the Grupo, to everybody who has been affected, inspired, or moved by Hermeto's music in some way, shape, or form. I've been a wreck the past couple of days since the news came out. And, for me, I've lost two huge influences this year, Hermeto and Eddie Palmieri, who both, there's a similarity in both of their music to me in the way that they are both so deeply connected to various folkloric traditions and yet have absolute freedom as improvisers and composers. They have this melodic and rhythmic sense that grounds their work and lets them at the same time go to the furthest reaches of space. And I guess the only thing I can do to honor them is to try and live up to the examples that they've set as artists, as people, as non-traditional educators. Anyway, that's my ramble in honor of Hermeto Pascoal. Go play some music, go make some sound, and if you haven't listened to Hermeto's music, go check it out. There's something there for everyone, and even though I only met him in person once, I miss him deeply. And that's it. Thanks for watching. This is not the usual type of video that I make, but I felt compelled to share this with whoever's watching. Alright, take care. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.